How do you know when you've outgrown your current version of success? When the thing you're trying to save is the very thing keeping you stuck. Because not all success is worth keeping. I've been an entrepreneur since 2012, and I've made multi-millions through my career and business ventures. I've helped founders and organizations go from 6 and 7-figure infrastructures to scaling their businesses to 7 and 8-figure empires. I've helped women transform their mindset and their relationship with money to transform their lives. And by 2025, I burned it all down. I thought I wanted more success, but it turns out what I really wanted was more alignment. Welcome back to the Black and Wild Podcast. I am your host, LaTanya, and this episode, I talk about how I destroyed an empire, the journey I'm taking to stabilize and rebuild from scratch, and how I'm helping other founders avoid my mistake. So I've never shared this story before. I've never really gone in depth. If anything, I've probably gone in hiding and avoided telling this tale, but I think it will be helpful to a lot of people to understand that journey and understand how easy it is to get there even when you think you have the best intention. So let's talk about some of the warning signs that I ignored. One major one is just feeling disconnected. I felt disconnected in a lot of my ventures, but not a lot of them, but quite a few of them. But I thought the answer would just be more work. If I did more, I would get to a place of feeling in alignment with it all. And I can tell you that that's not true, right? I was wearing too many identities. I saw opportunities. I knew that because I was good at operations and infrastructure and building systems, I believe that I could build systems for any business. And I've proven that to myself many times because I've built multiple income streams that have made me a significant amount of money. I did that because I was good at my skill set. I was good at my area of expertise, and I knew that I could do it. But I wore many hats. I built businesses just because I could and not because I really cared about them, some of them, or had real interest in them. I just knew that I just saw a need for that business, and so I built it. And a lot of times I was building things because they looked impressive. I built multiple income streams. I shared my success online because it was impressive. A lot of it wasn't really about what I wanted to create. Not to say you should focus on passion over profits. I think that you should have a blend of both. Over the years of my business, when I look at my full body of work, right? When I look at my full portfolio, there were businesses or income streams, even side hustles before that, that I definitely built because there was just an opportunity, not because I was necessarily interested in them. And that led to constant burnout because if you don't really care about the thing and you're putting all this effort into it, it's always going to feel like work to do. You're always pushing yourself. You're always trying to motivate yourself to keep going. And that just leads to constant burnout all the time. And the last thing I would say is that I was ignoring what actually fulfilled me. The things that actually fulfilled me, I was always asking myself, well, how does this make me money? And not everything that you do has to be something that makes you a lot of money. And I've learned that the hard way, just knowing where I am now. Everything that you do doesn't have to be a money maker. And I'm going to talk more about that as I go through this episode. But if you can relate to this, then I want you to think about the warning signs that you might be ignoring and how you can avoid the inevitable collapse that I'm about to share. And throughout this episode, and for this episode, I really want you to take notes. Get you a pen and a notebook or something, but I want you to take notes of some of the warning signs as well as just the history that I'm about to share. Because if you are trying to build something or you're already building something and you're kind of feeling a disconnect already, or you're feeling like something isn't in alignment, and you're wanting to figure out how to get back on track, I think this episode is definitely for you. So, in order to really understand the collapse, I feel like I have to give you the backstory. And I don't want to take too much time telling you my whole life story, but I think it's important for you to get an understanding of my mindset as a business operator, as well as, how we got to the collapse. By sharing the history, you can see some of the warning signs throughout. Okay, so I'm going to give it all to you. Not just the business stuff, but the things that were happening around the business that were fueling some of the things that I was doing in the business. Okay. And it's all going to make sense when I pull it all together. So I started coaching in 2012. I was doing it for free for a little while and just like as a side hustle. And I officially started a business in 2015. I left my job in 2016 and went full time into the business. In 2016, I was making consistent money per month for a while. And then, kind of had some peaks and valleys there. In 2017, it was a real struggle in 2017. I had revamped my business a few times by this time, trying to make consistent money. I had like peak months and then some months where I didn't make any money at all, and I wanted to avoid that. So for a while, I just kept pivoting to something else, which in hindsight hurt the brand, but I didn't understand that at the time. And so I just kept recreating things or redoing things and adjusting things. So 2017 was a real struggle financially. And this is like my first experience with not being in alignment because I started a business a certain way, didn't like that I wasn't making money certain months, not being mindful of how business really works. Sometimes that happens. It was still a new business. It was still a young business, so there was still time for it to grow out of that phase. But I was a new business owner. I didn't understand that that's just a part of how business works sometimes, right? So in 2018, after all this pivoting, I hit six figures, but I was extremely burnt out from all of the changes and all of the effort I was just putting in after experiencing such struggle that by the time I made the six figures, I was shocked that I had even made the six figures. That's how out of alignment I was. Did my numbers to do my taxes that year, and I was like, "Oh shoot, I made six figures for real!" And this was like my first six-figure year, and it was a bittersweet feeling. Like I was excited because this had been such a goal for such a long time, but also like, oh my God, how hard did I have to work for this? I just couldn't imagine doing it again. And so that same year, I went back to work and I sold that business for $50,000. That's how bad. Like I was like, I can't do this like this. And so I sold it. And with that money, I invested some of it in stocks. I invested in a Roth IRA, and I also invested some of that money into a life insurance policy just to stabilize, because feeling that unstable after having a career into going into work full time, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So when I got that money, I was like, I'm gonna focus this money on really like building some sort of stable foundation for myself. At least that's what I thought I was doing. And I did. I did in a way because all those things are great to do to have some investments, but it was really from very fear based. After the six-figure year selling the business, I went back to work. And that made me feel stable because that's the illusion of a 9 to 5 stability. Okay. In 2020, so a couple years later, I had hit 800,000 in stocks and investments. In 2021, I invested in Airbnb. I also invested in vending machines, ATM machines. I took the Airbnb international, and by the end of 2021, my net worth was 2.8 million. And I want you to see how during this time I'm also working a 9 to 5. So life is looking good. I have the 9 to 5. I'm seeing my efforts bear fruit, right? So life is good. In 2020, I also created my first course. I relaunched my coaching business, and I used the course to offer other programs and services passively. And so the business also made 250K in 2020, the coaching business. So that's 800,000 in stock investments, 250K in the coaching business. This goes to the end of 2021 net worth 2.8 million. Also in 2021, the year that I made 2.8 million, I started coaching one-on-one and doing masterminds. I launched a mastermind called the Queen's Legacy Mastermind, which was a 25K mastermind. And in 2021, the business made 1 million. At that time, I was working an average of 10 hours a week in the business. I was still working the job I took in 2018, also consulting for two companies, two different contracts. And that kind of fueled my consulting endeavors and wanting to do that more. Those contracts ended in 2022. And in 2022, I took a 1-year self-funded sabbatical. If you've listened to my episode where I talk about how I made 250K in 9 months, that's where that episode comes from. It was during that sabbatical, I still created 5 income streams. I still had the coaching business, so that was one of the income streams. Airbnb was another. I started a laundry business for the Airbnb. I also was making money on YouTube. YouTube was giving out checks at that time. And I was making money from the podcast. Podcast was paying at that time as well. So I was doing pretty good, even while I was supposed to be on sabbatical. I literally only took a sabbatical from work because I was still from a 9 to 5, but I was still like running a business. The coaching business was mostly passive. In that episode, I also talk about stream stacking, which is how the laundry business was stacked on top of the Airbnb business because I saw opportunity there. These businesses were kind of stacked on each other in a certain way, and that's how they generated income for each other. But it's still, I thought that I was doing little, but I was still doing a lot. I was supposed to be on a sabbatical, really like learning and exploring. I started homeschooling that year as well. So, it was a lot happening still while on sabbatical. Started working again in 2023. This is when I was working in a 9 to 5 as a chief of staff. The 2 consulting gigs that I had before I went on sabbatical were chief of staff positions as well, and it was just contracted, but I was contracted for a few years and made a decent amount of money from that. That's what made me want to go into consulting, like I said, and I took the job as a chief of staff. And so where are we now? I worked at that job until 2025 when layoffs happened. The consulting gig, the chief of staff gig, was in government contract. It was a government contract, and we all know what happened beginning of 2025 when it came to federal jobs in DC. If you don't know, I live in the DMV area, and also the consulting industry took a big hit during that time with all the layoffs as well. While I was working, because I loved what I was doing, because I had gotten experience from the consulting gigs that I had, and now I was working as chief of staff, I felt like I'd found my dream job, like the dream position where I can kind of merge what I've learned as an entrepreneur as well as what I had been learning throughout my career. And so a lot of my energy went to focusing on that because I just was enjoying it so much, but it took me away from the business. It was a very demanding job. It had, I was working after hours sometimes. I was doing work on the weekends. It didn't feel like work at first because I was also working remote. So that's easy to kind of like trickle into your personal life when you're working remotely. So homeschooling. It was just a lot happening, but train was just moving. I was still chugging along and getting it done. And I want you to know, I want you to think about like work that you enjoy can still burn you out quietly. I think that's important to recognize is that even though you enjoy what you're doing, you still should make time for rest. And a lot of people don't. And burnout can still happen to you even when you love what you do, even when you feel like you just in this state of flow when you're doing it and when you're working. You still need to take a break. And between my work and homeschooling, which I enjoyed doing both, I didn't make any time for myself. And I was okay with that because I was just like, I just love what I'm doing anyway. So I'm okay if I don't have all the time in the world. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Okay. And because I was doing all of this, the businesses took a hit. Things started changing rapidly. Inflation started happening. People started having less money. Most of my businesses had been built on systems that made things passive for me. I just had to check in every once in a while. Most of it ran on its own. I had my people in place who were paid to kind of run certain things. And so I felt like I didn't have to think about it anymore because I just didn't have any more bandwidth. I left it up to everyone else in my system to do the job. And that was the wrong move. I had great people who worked for me, so nobody, took advantage or anything like that. But businesses change. Industries change. The environment, the economy changes, and your systems have to be able to change with it. And mine didn't. Okay. And so once I lost my job, things really started to collapse. Once one thing collapsed, it was like a ripple effect. The job was lost. The empire slowly was gone. Nobody was doing Airbnbs anymore. The laundry business slowly trickled off. I could have saved these in a certain way, but once I'd lost a job, I realized how exhausted I was. I realized how burnt out I was, and I wasn't paying attention. And so I didn't have the capacity to even try to save these businesses in some sort of way. Coaching business that I've had for how many years by this time for 10 years. I'd kind of let it, no, not kind of, it failed. It collapsed and I didn't have the strength to try to save it. I stopped doing my YouTube videos. I had already kind of stopped doing that. I wasn't consistent on my podcast, this podcast. Even after pivoting with this podcast and being very excited about it, I just didn't have the energy for it all. And so everything took a hit. I eventually lost my apartment, my car, my insurance. I had to send my kids back to school after homeschooling for 3 years at this point, thinking that it was the best thing for them, and it wasn't. I had officially hit rock bottom, which led to a nervous breakdown. Everything had happened so suddenly with job loss, with realizing that my businesses were failing, with having to change everything that I was loving and enjoying with work and homeschooling my kids, to now having to leave a place that I had lived in for 5 years, my dream apartment, losing my car because someone rear-ended me. It was just like so much was just happening at once, or like one after the other, that I just had a mental break. I was, and I talk about this. I won't get into it here, but I talk about this in my series on my YouTube right now. I'm doing a series on rebuilding, and in the first episode of that series, I talk about the nervous breakdown and all of that. So if you want to know more about what happened there and how I was able to heal and overcome that. I also talk about that in my weight loss video. I recently posted a video about my weight loss journey. You can check that out on my YouTube as well. I'll leave all these links in the description because I'm sharing a lot of these things and I'm going to share more. So the mental breakdown was really a pivotal point in all of this. And I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I had to figure it out fast. Now, here are the real mistakes that I made. For one, I optimized for achievement instead of alignment. The reason why I started to ignore my businesses, because that's what I did, is because I built systems for achievement. The businesses weren't all in alignment. I started the businesses because they were a good time to start them. When I did the Airbnbs, when I did the laundry business, when I did more passive income streams for my coaching business, was more for the achievement of scaling than it was for those businesses being in alignment or those decisions being in alignment. I was looking for the external validation. I built multiple income streams while on a sabbatical. For what? It made me money, and it was impressive to share how I made 250K in 9 months and how you could do it too. And at the time, things were just, the internet was paying. And so it was easy to put out something new. And none of it felt good, really. Some of it felt a bit performative. I can be honest about that. Even though the achievements were real, I was not doing what was true to me. So the second thing was external validation, looking for external validation. The third mistake I made was over-identifying with productivity. I am a type A person. Productivity is important to me, right? Structure, having a plan, all of those things. And I identified with that. I made that my identity for a very long time as a person who works in systems, as a person who works in operations, who's meant to think strategically in my career. That's been my role a lot of the time. And I love those things about myself. I went too far in making that a part of who I am, that when everything was lost, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. The fourth thing is creating success that isn't sustainable. Like I said before, any system that you build is always going to need to be edited as things change, right? As industries change, as the market changes, as the economy changes, you're going to have to make adjustments. But creating success in a business or a form of operations that doesn't align with you never is sustainable. Doesn't matter how good your systems are. As someone who works in systems, it doesn't matter how good your systems are. As someone who works in systems, who is admitting to creating failing systems, as someone who has worked with entrepreneurs who I've created impeccable systems for, who could not take their hands off the reins, still after having systems that could do it for them, I'm telling you that it doesn't matter how well your systems work if it's out of alignment. And that brings me to my next point, which is creating operating systems versus your identity. You want to have systems so you can have the freedom for living, not so you can work more, right? Not to create more work. I encounter entrepreneurs over and over who want the systems for their business. That's why they hired me. But then once they have those systems, they create more work for themselves. And it might feel like I'm contradicting myself by saying how I made a wrong move in creating systems for those income streams that allowed me to not be involved and let it run on its own. And that was a mistake. I'm going to clarify what I mean when I say that I made a mistake in not being aware of what was happening in my business when it was time to make adjustments is that the systems work. There was nothing wrong with the systems. What was wrong is that I created businesses that I didn't align with. I didn't fully care about them. And so when things started to go left, I didn't notice that the systems needed to change as much, or I wasn't paying as much attention. I also wasn't motivated to make it a priority because I was already doing other things that I really enjoyed, working as a chief of staff and being able to have time to homeschool my kids, and those were taking up my time even though I had no time for myself. I didn't want to add something that I didn't really my heart wasn't really in. I kept putting it off, and that's the difference that I'm saying. That's the difference I want to be clear about. You could have the systems that work, but if you don't care about the business, you'll bow out and that business will still fail if no one's there to kind of do some work on it, right? I was working 10 at when I was on sabbatical, I was working 10 hours a week in that business and it was doing great. The systems were built and all those things, and I was able to homeschool my kids without a problem. But once I started working and then homeschooling, that's all I had time for, and I enjoyed those things, and I didn't make any room for the business. So when it needed me to make those adjustments, I wasn't there to do that. I wasn't involved enough. Not saying I wasn't there. I wasn't involved enough to do that. And then you have the other side of the coin where the systems are there and an entrepreneur would take that time to create more work. And I've given you examples of me doing both. I've done both at different points in my business, in my entrepreneurial career. I've done both where I've had systems and couldn't take my hands off the reins, and when I had systems and took my hands off too much. There's a balance that needs to happen, and I didn't do that. So in essence, I made what I did and achieved my identity. And although I used to say I work to live and I don't live to work, I said that a lot back then and I believed it. When it was all gone, I quickly realized how much I didn't know myself outside of it all. And so it was time to rebuild. So this is where I am now. I'm rebuilding, and I'm rebuilding using principles I wish I had understood or I had been taught years ago. The first thing I'm doing differently is having intentionality over growth for growth's sake. I don't want to build and scale and do all those things just for the sake of building and scaling. I want to be intentional in why I'm making certain decisions for the businesses that I'm creating now. And I want to only build something that matters to me. Side note, even if you are building a business that you eventually wish to sell, let it be something that you care about. Let it be something that matters to you that you're putting out to work into the world. I'm not a person who's like, oh, your business has to be your baby, but it at least has to be something that you care about and that you are excited about putting out into the world in some way, to some degree. The second thing I'm doing differently is systems over hustle. I still think that's very important, but what I mean by over hustle is not just work, but in my personal life. Making sure I'm carving out time for myself. And in 2026, that has looked like what I call joy time every Saturday or sometimes Sundays, depending on how my weekends work out. I have a specific part of my day, which is usually my mornings, that are just dedicated to doing something for the joy of doing it. Not to make money, not to build something new. It's just for the joy of it. I spend that time sometimes writing. I used to write years ago fictional stories, but I didn't have time to do that anymore because I put all my energy into business and work. And so I'm spending some of that time writing. Sometimes I spend that time sewing, which is another joy that I had in my younger years, all into my 20s. I hadn't done that in a long time. So getting reacquainted with some of the things that brought me joy has been very exciting and very healing for me in 2026. It's part of the ways that I've been healing post the mental breakdown, just doing things for the joy of doing things and not just building anything, prioritizing joy. I've gone roller skating, which I hadn't done in I don't even know how many years. I got to teach my boys how to roller skate. They've been enjoying that. It's just been like a really amazing time focusing on things that bring me joy. The next thing I'm doing differently is integration over compartmentalizing things. Before, even though I had what I called a stream stack, those businesses were still very compartmentalized. They didn't work together completely. All of them could work individually, maybe anywhere from 10 to 20% of the customers that came to each business probably came from another one of my businesses. So while they were stacked in a way, they still had to work, they still operated individually. And today, I would rather have one business that has multiple income streams within it, that has multiple ways of making money, whether that be coaching, digital products, a membership. I'm thinking about it more in that way now than I am thinking about like creating literally separate businesses that work together, funnel from each other. I don't really want to do that anymore. And one of the things that I've been doing to kind of stay on track with this is creating a path to integration. While I love helping people build businesses, scale their businesses, go from 6 figures to 7 figures to 8 figures, I also enjoy helping people shift their mindset, elevate their lives through healing, and ultimately create better, transformative lives for themselves. It's been something that's been important to me ever since I started coaching. It's why I started coaching. I now am bringing those things together and have a structure for how I'm doing that for the next 10 years. And at any point, that plan may need adjustments, but I have one in place for how I'm integrating the things that I enjoy, the things that align with me and what I want to create for not just work and business, but also for my life outside of business and having that balance. I have a path that I'm taking that I make adjustments to integrate all those things so that it makes sense and I'm never, out of alignment again. The last thing I'm doing differently is focusing on sustainability over optics. I'm not doing this to look good. I'm not doing this for it to be perfect, for it to get praised. I am past that. I really want something that is sustainable, whether it makes me 500,000 or 500 million. I don't care. I just want to be able to create a life that is sustainable over time. Going through my backstory and hearing my journey through work and entrepreneurship and investing and all those things, you could see all the changes that were made and how nothing sustained itself long enough for it to be like a real path to freedom. Now, I made money. I made a lot of money. I made good investments. There were great parts to that experience, to the whole journey and the experience. But I burned myself out. I overwhelmed myself. The more I achieved, the more I felt like I had to do, to the point where I was building 5 income streams because I knew what to do to build them and to have them make money. But I didn't have to do that in order to have freedom and success. I already had it, and I wanted more for the validation of being able to do it well and scale. And I want you to be very careful of that trap because the money looks good, the investments look good, and you just feel like you have to do more and more. And I want to free founders and CEOs and operators of businesses. You don't need to do that. And I'll share with you how I'm making this all make sense for me, like how I'm keeping all of these things that I'm doing differently at top of mind. So every morning I have a personal board meeting with myself to constantly remind myself about my vision. Okay. Wednesdays are typically like my reset days. It's my day where I just kind of rest and reset for the next half of the week. The work is more light. I don't necessarily do my personal board meeting on that day, but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, I do it all of those days just to kind of lock in what my vision is. So I never get off track. Every 4 months, I have a new growth goal. And my current growth goal that I'm in right now is to build repeatable systems and habits that translate my consistent effort into visible growth and income, right? And this is without compromising my emotional stability because that's important. This is while having strong boundaries, which is also important. And it's also while maintaining a sustainable pace. I don't want to do this quickly. I don't want to rush it. I want it to make sense. I want it to align with where I'm going and how I'm healing and how I'm growing. And so the pace matters to me. My personal board meeting is, I put it in a deck. And so it's also where I house my path to integration. So I can always review it and make sure that I'm aligned with that. And this one meeting has really been a game changer in keeping me on my own path, so I don't build a repeat of the past in my life or in my work. So, to wrap this episode up, I want to say that maybe starting over isn't evidence that you failed. Maybe it's evidence that you finally become honest. And if that's where you are, this series is for you. Because over the next year, I'm documenting what it actually looks like to rebuild not just a business, but a life that aligns with who you really are. And to follow the series, I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow the Becoming series, The Rebuild Era, for more content. And if you like this episode and want to hear more, subscribe to the Black and Wild Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye, friend.